Yo, what is good, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please like and subscribe. Today I got a little story time for you because I know a lot of y'all are very nervous about your technical interviews. Let me tell you a little story that might give you some hope because I actually bombed a technical interview for the job I have right now. So yes, I bombed it and I still got hired. So I had been working on a government contract for about 2 years now, and honestly things were going great, but things were getting real slow. Like the amount of work that we were getting was just like pretty close to nothing, which sounds like it's great, but trust me, like for about 9 months I was just like real bored. And I started, looking at my resume being like, this looks good. Let me just start throwing my resume out there. So I started applying to big jobs like Nike, Google, Spotify, kind of like big dream jobs like that. Big like Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies that I really wanted to work for. And then I had turned my little LinkedIn notifications on, send me your job applications. Recruiter hits me up and it's for a very big company, a Fortune 100 company. I actually hadn't even heard of by the time, but when I'm doing some research on Glassdoor, I'm like, wow, this company is huge and has really good reviews. So I'm like, yeah, no problem. Let's get through it. Let's get started with the process. And I had been only applying for jobs for about 2 weeks. And in about 2 weeks, I already made it to the final round for 2 different companies. Now the first interview was pretty much just a phone screen. It ended up going about 30 minutes. Talked to the technical recruiter. It was a great conversation. Things were good. And he set me up to do the technical interview later that week. Pretty much as soon as they tell me that I'm gonna have a technical interview, I have like 3 days and then, well, there's a technical interview. There was one coding question which you could choose which language you could do it in. I chose R. Then there was a SQL coding question, and then there was a stats question. First question I choose my favorite programming language, which is R, and I get through the question pretty well. I actually was able to talk to the interviewer. He's able to give you some advice on how to do things. I really didn't need him too much, but I was able to get through the first question. A little bit bumpy, but I get through it. I'm feeling pretty confident at this point. Then second question comes in. Now if you watch my videos, you know that I do a lot more in R than SQL, so my SQL is a little rusty. My previous job I used to be heavy in SQL, so maybe I came in there a little overconfident, but this question, I knew it was kind of basic and I did struggle with it, which really annoyed me. And it actually took me a few times and a lot of interaction with the interviewer to finally get it right. And at one point he had to actually kind of write code for me because it was taking some time, and I pretty much was not going to get the answer if he didn't help me. And it was something like, it was a data pull pretty much, but there was a data pull with a bunch of nested queries in it. And it's something that if you work with SQL a lot, you can do. And I know I could have done it, but my SQL skills were rusty and he had to help me through it. But I get through it with his help. I finally get to the last question. This was a stat question, and it was pretty much about hypothesis testing. They pretty much gave you an experiment, and at the end you had to tell them what they did wrong in their experiment. So you needed to know about hypothesis testing, including like type 1, type 2 errors, p-values, sufficient sample sizes, but a lot about that in order to get this question right. And I kind of talked through it, gave him my ideas, I selected an answer, and then he goes, that's actually right. Good job, congrats. So I got 2 out of the 3 correct. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe I didn't sound too confident on the third one, but I did end up getting the right answer. So a few days go by and I do not hear back from them, and I say, hey, how did I do on that? And they said, we're moving through with other people. I say, damn, can you tell me why? And they said, your skills were good, your communication skills were great, but we wanted somebody who could have gotten through the SQL question a little bit smoother. I really hate these interviews, but I'm like, okay. So that's an L from company 1, but I'm kind of down right now, but I'm not too discouraged because I've only been looking for jobs for like 2 weeks. Now back to company number 2. I actually did that technical interview on that same day. So this was more like the 3rd round of interview. In total, I interviewed with 4 people. First person I interviewed with was actually a few days before this day, and I interviewed with the director. Everything went great. It was an amazing interview. He liked my energy, I liked his interview. We talked very well. We even talked about sports at the end. It was great. He told me he liked me. It was good. Next round interview was actually supposed to be the same day as the technical interview. I was supposed to meet with 3 people, but he had some schedule problems, so we met kind of the day before. Had an interview with him. He's kind of like an analytics manager. I worked out with him. Had a good interview with him. It was really good. I enjoyed it. I'm very confident going into this. Now, these last 2 interviews were on the same day as the company number 1 interview I had. So I was already feeling a little kind of down about that technical interview, and I have to go straight to this other technical interview with the other company. So now, the first interview that day, which is actually the 3rd interview for company number 2. Talked to another guy. He's very technical. He starts asking me questions on my resume about the projects I'm doing. And I do a pretty good job answering the questions. You know, he asked me about entropy, about random forest, things like that. Things that he sees on my resume. And I don't have a problem answering these questions because I did these projects, so I know about the stuff that I'm doing. So the interview goes, you know, I would say it's pretty tough. So I didn't say it goes great, but it went good. Like, it went solid. I could tell the dude liked me, even though he was digging really deep. I did good. Now, this is where it all goes south. Last interview, woman from the data science team comes on, and we immediately jump into it. She's kind of like, oh, I'm in a hurry, blah, blah, blah. We immediately jump into it. She starts asking me questions about my resume. First thing she asked me about is an LSTM model that I built. Happily start telling her. Then she starts asking me about the data structures in it, and I'm kind of telling her about that too. And then she kind of asked me about some problems that I've had with it. And then I start telling her. And at one point I'm diving into it. She's asking me about training and test sets because there's a problem in the way I set up my test set. And I'm thinking, like, this woman is wicked smart because I'm trying to explain to her the data structures of an LSTM I made a year ago to her. And she's fully understanding what I'm talking about and pointing out the errors in what I'm saying. And I have to go back and kind of fix it. And I'm like, oh, wow, this woman is a genius. But she finds, from just me verbally explaining to her, she finds an error in the training and test set. And she asked me a question about how the test set is kind of like imbalanced. And then I started talking about the training set. And she kind of cuts me off and she goes, that has nothing to do with test set. We don't have that much time, let's keep going. And I was kind of like, oh, dang, okay. Like, I hope she does that to everybody. Like, I hope she don't think I'm just dumb. But like, we go on next to it. I'm kind of like shaking, okay. And then she's like, okay. She asked me a question. She pretty much goes straight from that and just straight up just asked me a question about Python coding. Now, my Python skills are a little rusty. Again, my last data science job, we worked exclusively in R. So I'd been refreshing myself about Python, but she asked me a question straight about Python. And it was a question where I had to know the terminology of certain things in Python. Because I had been using Python, I forgot the terminology of kind of what she asked me about. And then she asked me if I knew what this was. And then I said, no, I don't know what it is. And then it was a silence, kind of like this. And I'm just like, oh. And I'm trying to think of something to say, but it's nothing, it's just silent. And she's like, okay. And then she pretty much takes her laptop and like types it out in the chat what it is, and I look at it. And I was like, bro, I know what that is. I just didn't know what the name of it was, you know? Like, I didn't know what the name of it was. But I'm like, oh my God. Like, I'm starting to like, I'm getting a little rattled now. And she's like, okay, well, this should be a pretty basic problem. And I was like, oh God. And she was like, this should be a basic problem. She types out a problem to me and she was like, she pretty much asked me to answer a coding question that she typed out in the laptop. And she was like, solve this, like type the code back to me. I'm looking, I was like, basic, but I have no idea how to do this. And she's like, it's okay. Like, you can use Google. And I'm like, all right, but I didn't want to spend too much time on it. So I typed some BS in there. Typed some BS, I sent it back. And she looks at my answer. And again, she's like, is that your answer? And I was like, yeah. And again, it's like, she's like that for like 10 seconds. And I'm like, is that right? And she was like, no. And then she types it and like types the right answer. And I'm like, oh God. And I was like, bro, I want this to end right now. And then she was like, okay, one more question. Another SQL one, this is pretty basic. And it had something to do with kind of like removing duplicates from a data set. And again, my SQL is shaky. So I look at it, I have no idea how to do this. And my answer is trash. Look, I don't even really know what the question was, but I know my answer was complete garbage. Same thing, I give her my answer, and she stares at me for another 10 seconds and says, no, and then gives me the right answer. And then she's like, okay, do you have any questions for me? And I was like, dang, like there was no, why would I even ask a question? I was like, there's no way I'm about to get hired. Like, I'm like kind of rattled. I'm not showing it though, because you know, I ain't soft, but I'm like not showing it, but I am like rattled. I'm like, oh God. I asked her one question. I think the question I asked her, which, you know, I just Googled it, like a good question to ask, but it was a serious. I was something like, oh, like, what do you think the shortcomings are in this position? Or what do you think are my biggest challenges for this position? Like, what do you think the biggest challenges are for the position? She answers it, and then blah, 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 we're done, we log off. And I'm feeling awful. So I just bombed 2 technical interviews in one day. And I'm like, dang, and I'm thinking like, damn, if I really want to get these jobs, like if I really want to apply for jobs, I'm going to have to go hard, no more just loosely applying and kind of studying and stuff. Like, I'm really gonna have to start studying my stuff again. And then a few days go by. I already told you what happened with the first company. Reached out to the recruiter for company number 2. I already know what's gonna happen. And she's hitting me up and she's like, yeah, could you have some moments to talk? And I was just like, yeah, I did. And she was like, okay, cool. Now, I've had recruiters who have offered me a job before and they sound excited, and this woman did not sound very excited. So I was like, oh, I already know what's going to happen. So then she calls me and she's like, hey, you know, how was your day? And I was like, good. And she's like, oh, okay, cool. Well, as you know, they were, you know, interviewing a bunch of people for this position. And I was like, yeah, here we go. You know, you're going to add me to your talent network or something. But she goes, there were 4 candidates and there were 4 interviewers. And the 4 interviewers all had you as the number 1 candidate. And I said, what? And he was like, yep. So they all had you as the number 1 candidate, and they're expecting to formally make you the offer tomorrow. And I was thinking, like, my mind was racing. I was not expecting this. And I was like, okay, the first interview, I understand, went great. Second interview, okay, that makes sense. Third, I was like shaky, but okay. But then the 4th, and she was like, yep, yeah, like, congratulations. And I was like, wait, you said I was the number 1 for all of them? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, what about for the 4th one? And she was like, yep, you're the number 1. And I was like, really? Like, she didn't say anything else? She was like, yeah, they did say you're the number 1 candidate, but they did put that there is room to improve as far as your technical skills. But based on your resume and past experiences, you meet the criteria. And I'm like, this is all hitting me. And then they start talking to me about the salary, and I'm like, whoa, that's a lot. And I was like, this is all hitting me. I was like, literally, I even went back and asked her, and I was like, I was really the number 1 candidate after all that? And she was like, yeah. She said that the reason I was the number 1 candidate for all of them, again, it wasn't the technical skills, it was because of my ability to communicate, which I guess all the other candidates were not able to communicate as effectively as I was. And I did that. I had my best interviews with the people that mattered the most, I believe, too. And we were able to talk, communicate, and things like that. But pretty much what I'm doing this video is to tell you is you can bomb a technical interview and still get the job. You know, work on your soft skills, work on your ability to communicate. And if you naturally have that, you can go very far in tech, because a lot of people in this field are not able to communicate, are not able to hold a conversation. They're weird. You know, if you have some personality, if you have them soft skills, if you're a leader, if you're confident, you can go a lot farther than you think. Because there's a lot of people out there with really good technical skills, actually. It's getting pretty saturated. Not many of them can talk. Learn how to talk, keep your heads up. I'm signing off for today. That's my story. Let me know what else you want me to talk about in the comments. Peace, deuces, see you next time.